I'd buy you a house.
I would buy you a house.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
buy you furniture for your house.
maybe a nice Chesterfield or an ottoman.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a K car.
a nice Reliant automobile.
And if I had $1 million, I'd buy you love. If I had $1 million,
I'd build a tree fort in our yard.
if I had $1 million,
You could help, it wouldn't be that hard.
if I had $1 million,
Maybe we could put a little tiny fridge in there somewhere.
We could just go up there and hang out.
Like open the fridge and stuff, and there would always be food.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We continue on with chapter 24 on the digestive system, part 2. So, last time we left off with the chyme in the stomach, and we did have some chyme starting to slip in to the duodenum. So we leave off now starting at the small intestine. So the small intestine is roughly 2 to 4 meters in length. And this is considered to be the major site of digestion and likewise nutrient absorption along the GI tract. So if we were to break down the small intestine, the first section I mentioned is the duodenum. This section is roughly 10 inches long and receives gland secretions. So it's going to go ahead and accept bile, which is a green substance that's going to be released from the liver, or it could be released from the gallbladder. The bile is produced to the liver. The storage tank is going to be the gallbladder for the bile. And the bile ultimately helps as being an emulsifier for fats, along with release of digestive enzymes, especially referring to the enzymes coming from the pancreas. So that's the first section. So 10 inches. The next section of the small intestine is known as the overall jejunum. That is 8 feet in length and is very twisted and coiled. And another characteristic that the jejunum has, that the duodenum does not, is mesentery. So mesentery, right, is a picture you can see right here. And the mesentery is the sheath that you see here. See this fine, clear sheath? That's the mesentery. You can see through it, very transparent. There are blood vessels we can see here, capillaries that extend through. You would have also lymphatic vessels that can extend through here too. And so this material really helps with ultimately proper nutrient absorption of your proteins and carbohydrates and nucleic acids and fats as well. So very important material here, the mesentery. A huge property of the jejunum, of course. This is the major site for chemical digestion and nutrient absorption. This is the major location of where nutrient absorption occurs, is in that jejunum. And then the last section of the small intestine is the ileum. It is 12 feet in length. And there's also mesentery here too, and it's also twisted and coiled. And likewise, you will have some nutrient absorption that also occurs here too. Okay? So very important to be aware of these 3 major sections of the small intestine: the duodenum, or also known as the duodenum, the jejunum, and finally the ileum. And so, of course, the chyme is going through these different parts of the small intestine again. Right? We talked about the chyme being formed in the stomach. And likewise, the chyme is going to continue going through the small intestine here. So what really helps the small intestine when it comes to nutrient absorption? Well, there's a couple factors that can really assist with this process, especially when we think of that nutrient absorption occurring in that middle section of the small intestine, the jejunum. You do have a huge increase in surface area, and that really helps with nutrient absorption. Some of the various structures you'll find that can help with an increase in surface area, well, number one, circular folds. So we can see that here. Here we have circular folds. Okay? So that's right in the interior of the small intestine. And these circular folds are permanent. They're there. And they can force the chyme to spiral through the lumen. And that allows for adequate time for full nutrient absorption to occur. Again, of your macromolecules. Also, what helps with nutrient absorption here are what are known as the villi. And the villi are these very, very small finger-like appendages, these little structures. And they play a very important, significant role with nutrient absorption, which we'll get into very soon. So we have the villi. And then even smaller than the villi, we have what are known as microvilli. So these are even smaller, almost like overall bristles on a toothbrush. So we'll get a better perspective of this when we go ahead and look at the next slide. But these are very important characteristics when it comes to this idea of increased surface area in the jejunum, the idea of circular folds, the villi, and the microvilli. All right, so here we're looking at the villi. So very close up in the interior of the small intestine. The villi are finger-like extensions, and they play a huge, significant role when it comes to nutrient absorption. And if we take a look here, these structures are the villi. If we're simply looking at one, then it's going to be defined as a villus. But plural, meaning many, then we have here what's known as the villi here. Plural, singular, villus. Now there's going to be a variety of different cells that are found amongst the villi. Majority of these cells are going to be defined as absorptive cells. And these cells here play a huge role with nutrient absorption and likewise electrolyte absorption. So again, when we think of our nutrients, we're thinking of carbohydrates, we are thinking of nucleic acids, we are thinking of proteins, and likewise fats. So they are going to go through these cells ultimately. However, the proteins and carbohydrates and nucleic acids will continue on into blood capillaries. Fats, however, it's a little different. The fats will be absorbed into what are known as lacteals. Okay, lacteals. So in this picture here, the lacteals are these green structures that I'm circling here. Okay? The green structures. So again, a finger-like structure when we consider the villi. If we look at one, okay, we have what's known as the villus. And again, right in the middle is where we would have the actual lacteal. If we just imagine that. Okay, and the lacteal here is a part of the lymphatic system. Again, that would be green ultimately. So maybe we can make that green here for you. There we go. Now we have it as green. So the lacteals would be green. And then around the sides then of your velus, we'll change it back to red for you here. A little bit of red and a little bit of blue. And then that would represent the blood capillaries. Okay, so we'd have our blood capillaries here. So I'm writing this in blue for you. So blood capillaries. Just so you have another picture for a nice perspective here for you. Blood capillaries. And they're important because it's through the blood capillaries that you have the movement of, again, the proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. They're going to go into the blood capillaries. In contrast to the lacteals that are going to have fats being absorbed into them. And then fats actually travel through the lymphatic system. Okay? So that's just another little picture I drew there for you. Again, you can see the blood capillaries being represented here in the picture, right? This green vertical structure here that I circled, again, the lacteal. Other cells that you can see here in this diagram, you have the goblet cells. They're important for proper immune system functioning as a whole. And you also even have what are known as the duodenal glands, and they actually secrete an alkaline mucus, which can assist with the decrease in the pH of the GI tract. So the glands you can see right down here. And so that's important ultimately because, again, the pH of the chyme leaving the stomach, very low pH, and ultimately we need to assist with increasing the pH of the chyme to make it more neutral, which is important for proper nutrient absorption, to have it neutralized close to 7. Because you're going to have that pH in the stomach there, again, being around 1 or 2, and leaving the stomach and going to the small intestine, ultimately, we got to get that back up. Another thing we can also see on here, I know there's a lot on this slide, it's also important to consider the brush border enzymes, which are found in the microvilli. And again, these microvilli, they're projections of absorptive cells that you literally have scattered around the velus. Very, very small. Micro, of course, referring to small, and hence called the brush border. So the microvilli contain these brush border enzymes, and there are many of them. They're very key for completing the digestion of carbohydrates and proteins. So breaking them down essentially into their building blocks, which of course would be the simple sugars, the monosaccharides with carbohydrates, and amino acids for proteins. So a lot on this slide, a lot of key things to focus in on and to definitely know. All right, we're now going to take a look at a couple accessory digestive organs. First, we take a look at the liver, a very important organ. You cannot live without a liver. Very important for your survival. The liver has many important functions, one being the storage of your nutrients, such as your glucose. Okay? So, storage of nutrients. So, we're talking about storage of carbohydrates. We're talking about storage of fats. We're talking about storage of proteins. So, very important here. You also have vitamins stored in your liver, which are called the fat-soluble vitamins. The liver is also critical for detoxification of drugs and poisons. So, very key for breaking down drugs, poisons, so breaking down alcohol, okay, possibly various drugs that people could be taking, the liver is playing a role in, so very, very important. And the liver is the location for where bile is produced. So this is where this green bile substance is produced. The bile, very important. to assist as being an emulsifier for fats, helping ultimately for the actual absorption of the fat. And then the gallbladder, that is going to be your green structure here. Of course, this is all the liver up here, but here is your gallbladder. So that's kind of sitting kind of inferior to the liver. The gallbladder is important for its functionality because this is where the bile is stored. Bile is going to be stored in your gallbladder. So that's this temporary storage tank. So some people have to have their gallbladder removed. And sometimes it has to be removed because maybe there's a lot of severe inflammation in the gallbladder. Maybe there's gallstones being stuck. And ultimately, the safest route is to simply just have it removed because of this severe pain. And so if that happens with the gallbladder being removed, you can live a fairly normal life without it. You definitely need to alter your diet when it comes to, processed foods, fats, and things like that. And you might be wondering, well, where can the bile be stored then? Where can it be stored within a gallbladder? Well, ultimately what happens is you can have some of the bile stored in the bile duct. That's the big duct that ultimately is transferring the bile to the small intestine, to the duodenum. So some bile can be stored there, but you do have to alter your diet somewhat early on. There may be some issues like diarrhea and abdominal bloating and things like that. So you do have to be a little bit more strict with your diet. That's extremely important, especially in regards to fats. All right, so we're going to take a look here now at the overall structure of what's known as a liver lobule. A liver lobule, because your liver is made up of liver lobules. Okay, so we're going to take a look here at the anatomy of a liver lobule. And some of the important features of the liver lobule, important for filtering, processing that nutrient-rich blood, very key. And ultimately, this liver lobule is made up of hepatocytes. So let's take a look at blood flow first here. So here, and we can make this back to being red. That'll probably be easier to see. There we go. So we start off first by looking at the hepatic portal vein. And this vein is very unique because it's actually delivering nutrients to the liver lobule, overall storage of nutrients. So the hepatic portal vein will do that. And eventually the hepatic portal vein gets real small and you eventually end up with a venule. So now we take a look at what's known as the portal triad. And at each side of a liver lobule, you have a portal triad. And the liver lobule is ultimately a structure that's a hexagon-like structure of 6 sides. So if I were to sketch that for you with my lovely artistic skills, so gifted in this area, I know. Yep. Oh, it almost turned out. This gives you an idea of what the liver lobule would be, right? So this would be a liver lobule right here. The hole here would represent what's known as the central vein. Okay, central vein. So this represents a liver lobule here. And then each side, and we can erase that here for you. And then each side of the hexagon here of the liver lobule, each side here of it, here, 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 okay. And there we go. We'll fix that. Each side here, because it should be 6 sides. Ah, there we go. Each side has the portal triad, okay? So here, 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 so on and so forth. And I can show that with my laser pointer here for you too. Every single spot here, every corner, you have a portal triad. So what ultimately makes up this portal triad, you may wonder? Well, we have a part of what's known as a bioduct. So that makes up part of the portal triad. Because again, bile is produced in the liver. This precise location of the liver is known as the biocanuliculi. Okay, the biocanuliculi. That's the precise location where bile is actually produced, is within the biocanuliculi. And that's part of the portal triad here, the bile duct. Another part of this portal triad is known as the portal venule. So the portal venule. So this is shuttling nutrients, again, from the hepatic portal vein. You have nutrients that are going into the liver lobule. You also have the portal arteriole here. So ultimately that is shuttling the oxygen-rich blood. So your oxygen-rich blood is being supplied here. So oxygen-rich blood. Okay, and then ultimately movement of the bile, obviously going through this bioduct here, which will eventually make its way to the common hepatic ducts, and then on to the bioduct or cystic duct. And then the portal venule, finally here, to make some room, we'll just put it up there for you. But again, that's going to supply nutrients, ultimately, nutrients. And we're talking, again, about nutrients being your proteins, your carbohydrates, fat, things along those lines. So gas exchange is going to occur here within the liver lobule. These are hepatocytes here. And then oxygen going to these cells. Of course, carbon dioxide can build up. And then it's a matter of the blood continuing on flowing. So the oxygen-poor blood eventually makes its way into and through the central vein. Okay, this is the central vein all right here. Okay, so the central vein right here. The oxygen-poor blood then will go up through that central vein and will make its way then into the hepatic veins. So those always are situated on top of your liver, to eventually the oxygen-poor blood makes its way into the inferior vena cava. So that's how the blood flow occurs here. Okay, so your liver is made up of all of these liver lobules, and nutrients can be stored here. Oxygen-rich blood comes here. Okay. Of course, CO2 needs to leave through here. Vitamins can be stored in the hepatocytes. So this gives you an idea of the more of the overall anatomy of the liver itself, especially more at the micro anatomy of the liver. All right, so now we take a look briefly at liver disease. And we look at cirrhosis. So cirrhosis is defined as a very progressive, chronic inflammation of the liver. So it's chronic, this type of disease, cirrhosis, so people can live with this for a fairly long time. There are several different causes for cirrhosis of the liver. One being alcoholism, and that used to be the #1 factor for cirrhosis of the liver for decades, was just drinking way too much. But another reason would be severe chronic hepatitis. So someone goes ahead and they end up getting hepatitis. Maybe they're into drugs, using needles and things like that. But actually, the #1 reason now for cirrhosis of the liver is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that's someone who is significantly overweight, obesity, very poor diet made up of processed foods, fast foods, fatty diet. And so they end up developing cirrhosis of the liver, which of course leads to liver failure. You notice that there's two pictures here on the slide showing differences in the liver itself. This image here is showing a normal, healthy liver, nice and smooth and uniform. And then the bottom picture down here is showing the surface of the liver with someone who has cirrhosis. See, there's all these nodules, deformities, and again, someone can start with the fatty liver and then it becomes fibrous over time. and scar tissue built up, and then the liver just can't properly function anymore. What can be done when someone has cirrhosis of the liver? Well, early on, what you can do is maybe it's important to start to eat healthy, stop drinking, do some exercise. Drastically changing your lifestyle can be important, but eventually if the liver gets very, very destroyed, ultimately really the only treatment that can really help ultimately is a liver transplant if you're able to get a liver in time. All right, thinking again about the gallbladder, like I mentioned, this is the storage location of bile. Bile, again, is a yellow-green substance, kind of foul-smelling, and contains more of an alkaline type of solution. And a big thing found in the bile are the bile salts, which are cholesterol derivatives. Ultimately, the important function here when we think of bile, I've mentioned before already several times, it acts as a fat emulsifier and ultimately preps the fat to undergo nutrient absorption. Some people, unfortunately, can develop gallstones, and if they get too big, they can get stuck ultimately within the gallbladder, going into the cystic duct or even bile duct. And they form due to cholesterol buildup. So to put in perspective, some of these are pretty big, these gallstones you see here. They almost look like maybe green little pebbles. Like this one particular here is bigger than this FDR dime right here. So imagine that getting stuck within the cystic duct or bile duct. It'd be very, very painful, real bad inflammation here. And again, it just becomes complicated, and the best option for the patient may be just to go ahead and surgically remove it. We move on and we leave those accessory digestive organs, the liver and the gallbladder, and now we're going to take a look at another accessory digestive organ and look at the pancreas. Okay, now looking at the pancreas. This is another organ that you need in order to survive. Just like the liver, you need a pancreas to live. There are two major types of functions when it comes to the pancreas. First, we're going to take a look at the exocrine functions, as we may not be as familiar about those, and then we'll briefly look at the endocrine functions. So first, we're going to take a look at the exocrine functions. So when we look at the exocrine functions, we ultimately look deep into the pancreatic tissue, and we look at two major types of cells. First, we'll take a look at what are known as duct cells. Okay, the duct cells. All these right here are defined as duct cells. The purpose of these cells is that they secrete bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice. And this bicarbonate eventually will leave this area of the pancreas, go down the main pancreatic duct, and ultimately the bicarbonate will empty into the small intestine. And the goal of the bicarbonate here is to go ahead and increase the pH of the chyme. Again, the pH is very acidic when it's leaving the stomach. Another important types of cells here are called acinar cells. Acinar cells, and they're critical because they secrete enzyme-rich pancreatic juice. So the enzymes of the pancreas are going to be produced here in the acinar cells. So here we have an acinar cell. These are all acinar cells all throughout here. The pancreas is very unique because it contains enzymes that break down all major nutrients. So there's a variety of different types of enzymes being produced here, such as pancreatic lipase and many others as well. We briefly take a look now at the endocrine functions of the pancreas. So now we take a look at the endocrine functions. Okay. And when we look at those, we see some histology here. We're looking at what's known as the pancreatic islet, or the islets of Langerhans. And this structure, I can draw it out here for you. here we have the islets of Langerhans right here. So you find this within the pancreatic tissue. Okay, so I just outlined it. And there's two major types of cells that you'll find here. So we have the alpha cells and the beta cells. Alpha and beta. And they're important. The alpha cells are important for going ahead and producing the hormone glucagon, and the beta cells produce the hormone insulin. Both of these hormones, insulin and glucagon, are critical for proper regulation of blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels. And again, you're able to see that in the histology here. These blue circle structures represent the beta cells, and the pink ones are alpha. So here you can see some pink ones here, alpha. So the endocrine function is very key ultimately, because this is where glucagon and insulin is produced, is within the islets of Langerhans. Key for proper overall regulation of sugar, your glucose. Okay, so now we're taking a look at, well, what ultimately is found in this pancreatic juice. So the composition of the pancreatic juice, a portion of it is water. And again, that's obviously important to neutralize that very acidic chyme. Electrolytes can be found here. We mentioned the idea of the bicarbonate that is released. So that's important here. That bicarbonate is a nice weak base. So definitely can help to increase the pH of the chyme. And a variety of enzymes are produced here. So amylase, remember amylase? That helps to break down carbohydrates. So we have the pancreatic amylase. Lipases, so we're talking about pancreatic lipase. The nucleases, so this is referring to digestive enzymes that help to break down nucleic acids. And these are all secreted in an active form. And then the proteases, these are referring to the protein digestive enzymes, the proteases. And so they're always secreted in an inactive form, very similar to when we talked about pepsin in the stomach, which was pepsinogen first, inactive state, and then ultimately became pepsin in the stomach. Had to be activated, and hence hydrochloric acid helped with that. So the proteases, for the protein digestive enzymes, ultimately become activated then in the duodenum. And of course here, it's trypsinogen becoming trypsin, the chymotrypsinogen becoming chymotrypsin, and the procarboxypeptidase becoming carboxypeptidase. Those are your three pancreatic protein digestive enzymes right here. So on a daily basis, you have roughly 1,200 milliliters to 1,500 milliliters of pancreatic juice being produced daily. And these items are being spilled into the duodenum. So you can see the very important processes, items produced in the pancreas, and hence why the pancreas is such a very important organ in the body. And you hear, unfortunately, people getting pancreatic cancer. And that cancer seems to be on the rise. A lot of unknowns with pancreatic cancer. Survival rates are very, very, very low for most people. And so, I mean, really options to extend the life, again, you know, you can do your chemotherapy, you can do your radiation, maybe surgically, you know, you remove part of your pancreas. You could try to do a transplant if need be, but difficult. And survival rate's very low. And it's unfortunate, one of these cancers that's caught, typically not until like stage 4. So very, very unfortunate for many of these people. But you hope that at least, you know, you can extend the life as much as you can. A big risk factor for pancreatic cancer is, research shows, is smoking. Secondary hand smoke is just as bad as primary of someone doing it. So that's a huge risk factor for developing pancreatic cancer, is smoking. But sometimes there can be mutations in genes and things like that. And certain genes definitely can bring on the cancer too. All right. So we're now going to take a look at two very important hormones that play a very important role with function of the pancreas, but also very important hormones that play a key role with communication with the liver and the gallbladder too. So here they are. The first one here we have is cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin. Typically, this can be abbreviated as CCK because it is such a long word. A big overall function of cholecystokinin is that it causes the secretion of the digestive enzyme-rich pancreatic juice. So this hormone communicates with the pancreas by interacting with the acinar cells, or acinine. Our other important hormone that you need to know is secretin. So secretin interacts in the pancreas. It causes the secretion of bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice by the duct cells. So cholecystokinin will interact with the acinar cells, and secretin will interact with the duct cells. So very, very important when it comes to digestive enzymes and bicarbonate being released from the pancreas. This all happens because of the communication with hormones. And these two are very important for you to know. So you're very key to make sure you know cholecystokinin and likewise that you know secretin. So very, very key that you know those. All right, so now we're going to take a look at this slide here. And this is looking at ultimately what happens in response to fatty chyme leaving the stomach and going into the duodenum. And ultimately, then what's the response of our critical hormones, cholecystokinin, CCK, and secretin? How do they become activated? So here is that chyme. And it's leaving the stomach, and it starts to pour into the duodenum here. So imagine the chyme being fatty, really fatty chyme. Okay? So someone having a diet that has a lot of fats, and it's, you have a major fatty chyme that's in the diet. So maybe it was eating a very fatty homemade blueberry pie with lots made of lard. Or maybe it was a nice fatty pie. And what I mean by that is, well, one of my cravings I have to stay away from, of course, is donuts. But also, you can get these really fatty pies. The fruit ones, it's not really obviously real fruit, but they're frosted on the outside, and you have the blueberry in the middle, or the chocolate, or whatever, vanilla. And typically, you get them at a gas station or a convenience store like that. Anyway, it's a big craving of mine. So I have to be careful. Those things are loaded with fat. I mean, you can look at them, and the back of it might say 30 grams of fat or 40 grams of fat, and calories like 500 grams. So it's just it's crazy. So imagine that chyme being really fat and entering into the small intestine. Well, eventually, that's a big trigger, okay? So this chyme here, big trigger, enters in the duodenum, and based off of that fatty chyme in the duodenum, ultimately communication can be sent to cells that can go ahead and release our hormones, cholecystokinin and secretin. Typically, these are cells along the lining of the duodenum. So down here, we have it color-coded. The red dots represent the cholecystokinin traveling in the body, and the yellow dots represent the movement of the hormone secretin. So these hormones ultimately will go to the bloodstream because hormones travel a long distance through the blood. So CCK and secretin enter into the bloodstream. First, let's take a look at what they do go into the pancreas. So let's start with CCK. CCK then goes to your pancreas, and CCK then will go ahead and ultimately are going to interact with those acinar cells. Remember we mentioned those, the acinar cells? So acini or acinar. Okay, so acinar cells. And by doing so, the acinar cells are going to release the digestive enzymes from those cells, and that pancreatic juice containing the enzymes then will eventually go to the small intestine in time. Okay, the yellow dots represent secretin. Secretin goes to the pancreas and interacts with another type of cell, this time not the acinar cells, but interaction with what are known as the duct cells. So the duct cells. And so now you have the secretion of the bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice. And that bicarbonate, nice weak base, ultimately that juice can travel to the duodenum and you can increase the pH of the chyme and get it more towards neutral of 7. Now, these hormones can also travel to either the liver or the gallbladder. So if we first consider what happens with CCK, the red dots here, we travel through the blood, and here we have CCK interacting with the gallbladder. So CCK then can cause the gallbladder to contract at a faster rate, and then the bile enters into the duodenum. So there's a huge demand for more bile to help with emulsifying the fat, and messages can be sent to the gallbladder there. Ultimately, the communication through the hormone CCK. So the gallbladder contracts more rapidly, and then ultimately then you have the spilling out of the bile from the gallbladder down the cystic duct to the bile duct, and voila, it pours into the small intestine. The other hormone is secretin, and secretin then in the yellow can travel to the liver, and secretin here can stimulate the liver to produce bile more rapidly. So maybe we need a lot more bile to break down the fat, so secretin can go ahead and stimulate that liver to produce bile at a faster rate. And so you can have some that may just go directly to the duodenum. You may have some that's going to be a storage tank of bile in the gallbladder. So very, very important here. So very important to make sure to know the functions of secretin, and of course cholecystokinin. Make sure to know those hormones for sure. All right, here we have a video of digestive physiology. You're more than welcome to watch it. It's about 10 minutes in length. So this will go through more of a review of your critical hormones, CCK, secretin. It also goes through some of them in the previous lecture notes, going through gastrin. So definitely you can take a look at it. It may help you with studying to get those functions down. And likewise may even get to focusing a little bit more on various digestive enzymes too. So definitely worth your while if you have time for sure to take a look at this video. It can definitely help you out. All right, so now we make our way to the large intestine here. And we've already gone through the chyme, going through the small intestine. You had a lot of nutrient absorption occurring of fats and of your proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. And then the chyme, of course, goes to the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum. And then eventually that chyme will slip into the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. So the ileocecal valve ultimately allows then for proper regulation and control, and allows that chyme to spill in. So you have partially digested food here. And once you get to this point, ultimately, a big function of the colon, the large intestine, is going to be reabsorption of your vitamins, water, and your electrolytes. They're all going to be reclaimed here, okay? So, reabsorption of vitamins, water, and electrolytes. So they're going to go through nutrient absorption along the colon. So now we're going to take a look at the various sections of the colon, the large intestine. So we can highlight these as we go through them. So the first part here is the cecum. So that's the first part here, okay? The cecum. The partially digested food. So still considering this to be chyme at this point. We make our way up the ascending colon here, okay? So ascending colon. From there then, the partially digested food, the chyme, will make its way to this horizontal part of the colon, and this is known as the transverse colon here, the transverse colon. Okay? So, the transverse colon. And then we have the partially digested food that goes down the descending colon, so now we're going down the descending colon. So descending colon. And then the last part of the colon, you get down to this S-shaped portion, and this is known as the sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon. So that's the last part there. So the sigmoid colon. By the time you get down to the sigmoid colon, the vitamins, water, and electrolytes have ultimately been reclaimed through nutrient absorption. So now you're really left with this, more of this indigestible solid. And here the chyme becomes feces. So we don't mention it as chyme anymore. Now we literally do have feces. Okay, so we get down here now, and the chyme becomes the feces, fecal matter now. And ultimately then, from here, the sigmoid colon, you're going to go ahead and the overall indigestible material, the feces, will then in time enter into your rectum. So pretty interesting along the way. So sometimes some people get sick, right? They end up with a particular type of virus. So maybe it's COVID. Someone has COVID, and one of their symptoms they have is GI tract problems. Some people do have that with COVID. And if you get real bad diarrhea, well, it really disrupts the colon, and you're not able to properly reabsorb water and electrolytes like you would, or vitamins. And so you lose all of that, of course, through really bad diarrhea. So hence, you get dehydrated quickly. So you really have to go ahead and drink a lot more water, Gatorade, to replenish the loss of fluids. That really helps, of course, with trying to stay as healthy as possible. And so when that diarrhea comes on, the colon sometimes is not working properly like it normally would. So hence, very important. And then ultimately, we look at our last function here, and we look at the intestines, the propulsion of the feces towards the anus. And that's what I'm getting at the end here, where the feces ultimately is the name we use when we get down to the sigmoid colon. And now ultimately it will make its way into the rectum. And in time, defecation will take place. Within the large intestine, you will find healthy, normal bacteria flora. And we sometimes think of bacteria being a really bad thing, but there's actually beneficial bacteria that lives in us. So bacteria flora makes its home in your colon and is able to synthesize the overall vitamin B complex and vitamin K. So that's definitely a beneficial thing for sure. And so when it comes to the bacterial flora, it colonizes our colon. There's literally like 10 million different types. So there's lots of bacteria that live in our colon. That's what they call their home. But other things can happen in the colon as well. So there's overall fermenting of indigestible carbohydrates that can make their way into the colon, especially things with high fiber. And that ultimately can lead to the release of odor and gas, the release of irritating acids and gases. And a lot of different foods can lead to that. Again, a high fiber diet, like I mentioned. Somebody that might eat a lot of spicy Indian food, Mexican food, a diet of lots of spices and things can definitely bring out the odor. And that odor that you smell ultimately is the release of the dimethyl sulfide and methane gases. Approximately each day, about 500 milliliters of gas is produced. And ultimately then the expelling of the gas, or the common word of farting, can occur 6 to 20 times per day. It just depends upon the person. So that's always a lovely smell that you get. And so obviously try to hold it in if you're on that job interview, right? You want to make sure to get that job. First impressions are everything. So, yep, good things here. All right, so now the feces has left the sigmoid colon and now enters into the rectum. On top of the rectum are rectal valves. They play a very important role. There are 3 of these rectal valves, and they help to stop the feces from being passed with gas, because obviously that would not be good, right? The feces then will make its way through your rectum and eventually into the anal canal. Okay? So the anal canal. And at this point now, the feces is ready to go out. It's time to do defecation. 2 sphincters are going to help with this process. So we have the external anal sphincter and the internal anal sphincter. And both of these sphincters are going to help with this process of defecation. So let's start with the internal anal sphincter here. So the internal anal sphincter is involuntary, so we have no conscious control over the internal anal sphincter. And this is made up of smooth muscle. Ultimately, you're going to have nerves connected in this vicinity back up to the central nervous system. And ultimately, that will be the overall process of how this becomes relaxed. And once that becomes relaxed, again, signals to the brain and down, back to the anal canal, that's a signal to you that, oh yeah, I need to go to the bathroom as soon as possible. And then once you get to the bathroom and you get comfortable, then it's time to defecate. And you have control over your external anal sphincter, which is voluntary, found in skeletal muscle. You have the ability then to go ahead and relax that external anal sphincter, and eventually you can go ahead and remove the feces. And that will eventually go out through your anus, right? And now you've defecated, you're feeling better, and you're happy, and you can put on a good smile, right? Now, this entire process of defecation is ultimately controlled by your parasympathetic nervous system, okay? Just like digestion ultimately here is controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, likewise so is the process of defecation as well. So very, very key here. Sometimes you hear of people, they get a little older and they end up with what's known as the overall prelapse rectum, which I hear is very lovely. And really big increased risk factors for that would be someone who's constipated. They're going ahead and they're really going at it when they're trying to defecate. That can really definitely increase your chances of the prolapsed rectum, or severe hemorrhoids would definitely play a role there too. Those are big ones, and this typically happens more in the elderly, the prolapsed rectum. And again, sometimes it can be, maybe some surgery to help, or there's even old-fashioned remedies of actually putting some sugar on the prolapsed rectum, and then through proper osmosis and reabsorption, it can actually help to get that rectum back to its normal length. But literally, the prolapsed rectum, the rectum is literally kind of out of the anus, and so again, a lot of elderly have that. Their sphincter muscles and such are not working as well, and a very lovely thing to look forward to down the road, right? All right, now we have some review questions. So here's our first one. So number 8, the blank is the major site of chemical digestion and nutrient absorption. So what would be the correct answer here? All right, and the correct answer here, I would probably go with choice letter B. So letter B is the correct answer, the jejunum. Number 9, bile is stored in the blank. So where is bile stored? All right, the correct answer here, I would probably go with, how about choice letter B, the gallbladder. Okay, the gallbladder. It's not going to be the liver here, right? Because this is where the bile is produced. So the correct answer here is B, gallbladder. Number 10 for review, the hormone blank causes secretion of enzyme-rich pancreatic juice by the blank of the pancreas. So what would be the correct answer here for 10? What would be the correct answer? All right, and the correct answer here, I would probably go with, how about choice letter D, CCK and acinar cells. So that would be the correct answer here for number 10, CCK and acinar cells. All right, our final review activity today is looking at the GI tract pathway. So please describe the passageway for food through the GI tract. And you can do that by drawing a flowchart diagram for me. Yay! Now, what can help you to do this? In your course packet under lecture handouts, you will find an overall flowchart of the GI tract. And so this gives you an idea of what I'm looking for. So you want to make sure when you're drawing this out to make sure to include all sphincters, all valves, okay? It's also important along the route to indicate where does the food become the bolus, where does the bolus become the chyme, where does the chyme become the feces. So that's what you get to work on here now. So, some fun ahead, right? Yeah. So let's go ahead and work on this together now. Hopefully you have your handout in front of you, or maybe you're like, well, I got this down pretty good from lecture. I'm just going to go ahead and wing it. So we'll go ahead and here we go. We'll go through this together. So first you start with food, right? You have your food. You had a lovely dinner. Maybe you had some nice steak and potatoes, right? Some nice grilled asparagus on the side. And the food then is put into the mouth, right? So the mouth or oral cavities. So the oral cavity here. Mouth would be acceptable too, but I'm going to go with oral cavity. And within the oral cavity, the mouth, this is, again, noting here that the food ultimately now becomes bolus, right? So now we're talking about bolus here. Remember we talked about that earlier in lecture? The bolus, which was that mass of compacted food because of mastication of chewing and the release of saliva from the salivary glands. So we're talking about bolus now in the oral cavity, in the mouth. From here, the bolus will enter into the throat, the pharynx. And the first part of the pharynx is known as the oral. So the oral pharynx, right in back of the oral cavity, right? The mouth. So the oral pharynx. The bolus next will leave the oral pharynx and will enter into the most inferior part of your pharynx, and that's known as the laryngeal pharynx. Okay, the laryngeal pharynx. So the laryngeal pharynx. All right, from here, the bolus is now going to go past your first sphincter, and this is known as the upper esophageal. So upper esophageal. Sphincter. Upper esophageal sphincter. So it's situated right on top of your esophagus. So now the bolus has entered into the esophagus. So you can imagine that, this early part is all a matter of looking at deglutition, really. So esophagus. Remember we mentioned this is about approximately 10 inches in length. And then from here, the bolus will go past the cardiac sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter. But cardiac might be easier. Cardiac referring to close to the heart, of course. And then from the cardiac sphincter, the bolus will slip into the stomach. Okay, so that's kind of part one. If you think about it, this was the first part of our lecture notes, was going from the food, going through the oral cavity, the parts of the pharynx, your upper esophageal sphincter, esophagus, cardiac sphincter, and then into the stomach. So that's the first part here. Now we're going to look at more of the second part here. So we're going to go ahead and just erase everything here. So now we start with the stomach. And up in your stomach, you're going to have some really strong, vigorous churning taking place. And with the overall release of gastric juice and some breakdown of your nutrients here, you already had breakdown of carbohydrates and fats up in the mouth, the oral cavity, from salivary glands. But now you have breakdown of protein here from pepsin, and continuation of some breakdown of fats through gastric lipase. But ultimately, the bolus is converted into what's known as chyme here, which is a creamy paste, right? So we have our chyme here. Chyme. And the chyme then starts to slip out of the stomach because the lower sphincter here is called the pyloric sphincter. Okay? So this is known as the pyloric sphincter. And this sphincter will regulate the movement of the chyme from the stomach into the small intestine. All right, so the chyme will go through the pyloric sphincter and will now enter into the small intestine, and the first section is called the duodenum, or the duodenum. Definitely the shortest part of the small intestine by far. From here, the chyme will go from the duodenum to the jejunum. Okay, it's to the jejunum. This is the middle section of the small intestine. And again, this is where the majority of the nutrient absorption will occur. And then the last part of the small intestine is the ileum. Okay? The ileum. So essentially there's three parts here that make up your small intestine. From here, now the chyme leaves the small intestine by going through a very important valve, and that's known as the ileocecal valve. Okay? So the ileocecal valve. And then from here, the chyme will then make its way into the large intestine. So the first part of the large intestine is called the cecum. Okay, the cecum. And then from there, the chyme will make its way into the ascending colon. So essentially you're going up. So ascending colon. And then from there, you have the transverse colon. So the horizontal portion here of the colon. So transverse colon. And then you have the descending colon. So now going down, the descending colon. And then your last part of the colon, again referring to large intestine, is the sigmoid colon. Sigmoid colon. And now we have our last part here that we're going to take a look at. And again, this entire area right here, all these structures that I just kind of markered would be your large intestine. Large intestine. Okay. All right, we'll erase this and then we'll look at the last part. So let's start at the last part of the colon. Again, the sigmoid colon. And by the time you get to the sigmoid colon, you pretty much are left with material that's indigestible. And so the chyme now becomes feces. You now have formed feces. So chyme becomes feces. From here, the feces now is going to go past the rectal valves. And they always are situated on top of your rectum. So rectal valves. And then from here, the feces will enter into your rectum. From the rectum, the feces now will make its way into the anal canal. So anal canal. And now we're getting to a point where it's time to start thinking of defecation. So ultimately the removal of the feces. So what's going to help with that are two important sphincters, right? We have our internal anal sphincter. Ooh, and we can fix that here. There we go. So in the internal anal sphincter, and also our external anal sphincter. Both of those will help defecation, and that will allow for the feces to eventually go out through the anus. And you've gone through the whole GI tract, all 30 feet. Defecation is all taken care of, and you got it done, right? So you got it done. You're having fun right here, taking care of some business here and the little porta potty, and you get off and you're all set and you're ready to go and see the world, right? Because you went ahead, you defecated now into this toilet, and defecation is done. So, yay! So here you have it. Very important to make sure to know this flow chart. This one's a little longer, but very, very important to make sure to know this process. So, very, very good. Good work, all. Good work. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I leave you with some more lovely music. If I Had $1 Million, great song.